Hello everybody, hope you had a great weekend. Today we're going to move on to 9.5. If you have any questions on 9.4, make sure that you are at this point emailing me to set something up like a Google Meet, or 9.3 or 9.2, because I probably won't check that 9.4 question sheet anymore, but you can always just put it in the 9.5 question sheet if you do have any further questions, and I can help you out with that. But today we're going to start working on something that, in terms of algebra, is like one of the more famous formulas for algebra. If you talk to somebody that's taken it before and you say, oh, I'm taking algebra, they're going to say, oh, like the quadratic formula and stuff. So this is the big thing. This is just another way to solve quadratic equations. It's called the quadratic formula. Now, all the different quadratic equations that we've been solving, each one can be solved a different way, and sometimes it's better. I mean, we solve by graphing, we can solve by factoring, we can solve by taking the square root, we can solve by completing the square. There's all these different ways to solve it, and the way that they're set up, sometimes, it's easier to solve one way than the other. Like, for instance, if it's x squared plus bx equals a constant, well, then completing the square might be easier. If you can easily factor it, that's always the easiest way to do that. If you can easily just take the square root, then you should choose that one. The quadratic formula is great because you can use this when you don't know what else to turn to. You can really use this anytime you want, really. If it just says solve the quadratic equation, you can always just rely on the quadratic formula. So here it is in all of its glory. So it says x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2a. Now this is something you should memorize. I don't know if we'll be taking a test on it at any point, but it's something you should have down because in Algebra 2 you're going to be expected to know it. And it seems like it's impossible to memorize, but I'll tell you right now, once you do it a bunch, you just kind of get it down. So down here they also add that a can't be 0. Well, because if a is 0, it wouldn't be a quadratic equation. And b squared minus 4ac has to be greater than or equal to 0. We'll talk more about what that means tomorrow. This is the value inside of radical sign. It's called the discriminant, but we'll focus more on that tomorrow. Today we're just going to talk about the overall quadratic formula and how to find solutions for quadratic equations. So here it says solve this quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. So if I look at it, if I had to choose, I guess you could choose graphing. I probably wouldn't choose factoring because it's not easily factorable. The a value is not 1. You can't solve using square roots. Completing the square, you'd have to do a bunch of work to it and you'd get fractions. And so I'd probably want to stay away from that. So the quadratic formula is probably the best way to solve this problem. So what you're going to do is you want to first identify, well, what's a, what's b, and what's c. Well, a is 2. B is negative 5. And c is 3. So now that we have our a, b, and c values, we will plug them into the quadratic formula, which is right here from the previous screen. So we're going to take the opposite of b, which is going to be positive 5, because the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5, plus or minus. Remember that's going to give us possibly 2 answers. If we have 2 x-intercepts, we should have 2 answers. And then the square root of b squared, so we'll have negative 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 3. And that's going to be all over 2 times a, which since a is 2, will be 2 times 2. So now it's really all about PEMDAS. It's taking care of the things that we have to take care of in the proper order. So for instance, we want to do negative 5 squared inside the radical sign because remember P stands for parentheses or grouping symbols. The radical sign is a grouping symbol, so inside of this we'll take care of the exponent. So I'll have 5 plus or minus 25. We can take care of this multiplication too. We'll have negative 4 times 2, which is negative 8. Negative 8 times 3, which is negative 24. And 2 times 2 on the bottom would give us 4. So from here, 25 minus 24 would be 1. So we have 5 plus or minus square root of 1 over 4. So that gives us 2 options here. We have 5 plus 1 over 4, because the square root of 1 is 1, and we have 5 minus 1 over 4. So that's going to give us 6 over 4 here, which would simplify to 3 over 2, or 1.5. And then we here would have 4 over 4, which is 1. So x equals 3 over 2, or 1.5, and x equals 1. So now we've solved using the quadratic formula. So that's it, right? That's all you have to do. So why don't you guys do me a favor, try these two out. Pause the screen, and in a second I will just resume it and we'll go over them together. If you want to fast forward and just get to the answer after you've tried it on your own, you can do that, of course. Alright, so for number 1, we'll identify our a, b, and c. Now remember, it has to be in standard form, meaning it has to be ax squared plus bx plus c. If it's not, you have to make sure you get everything on one side. You want equal to 0 in order to solve using the quadratic formula. So we got our a, b, and c values here. Alright, and then we're going to just plug them in. So again, quadratic formula, if you want it to be brought up, put it right there. We got the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And I know you're thinking you're never going to memorize that, but it'll happen. It really will. I'm just going to do some of this work out while we're doing. So negative 6 squared would be 36. And then I'll have negative 4 times a, so negative 4 times 1, which is negative 4. Negative 4 times 5 is negative 20. So we have 36 minus 20 over 2 times a, which is 2. So at this point, we have 6 plus or minus the square root of 16. So 6 plus or minus the square root of 16 would be 6 plus or minus 4, all over 2. And that would give us two answers, which would be x equals 1. And the other one would be 10 over 2, which is 5. So x equals 5. Alright, so we'll do one more together, and then I'll just post the answers up for the next two. But, of course, fractions, I feel it's my duty to show you the one with the fractions. So we have a equals a half, b is going to be 1, and c is negative 10. So we have the opposite of b. So we have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 1, minus 4 times a. So negative 4 times a half is negative 2. Negative 2 times negative 10 would be plus 20. And that's going to be over 2 times a, which would be 1. Alright, so this will give us negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 21. The square root of 21, when I round to the 10th, is about 4.6. So I'll have negative 1 plus or minus 4.6 over 1, which, we don't have to write that. So negative 1 plus 4.6 would be 3.6. And negative 1 minus 4.6 would be negative 5.6. Alright, so for the other two, I'm just going to put up my work. You'll see that pop up in a second, and then I'll leave it on the screen. And if you have any questions on those, please write it down on the question sheet. Alright, so these are our answers for 3 and 4. I'll notice for number 4, you have to get equal to 0 first. You have to add 1 to both sides. And then, once you do negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a, you'll notice that inside the radical sign you get 0. So it would be 4 plus or minus 0 over 4, which is just 1. There's only one answer, which must mean that the vertex is on the x-axis. That's why you would get one answer. Alright, so if you want to pause the screen, look through the work, and if you don't agree with something, please put it down on the question sheet. Okay, so that's what we're going to cover today. So we're just going to practice some problems with the quadratic formula. We'll leave it there. So there's going to be some problems for you to do on big ideas. So get those done, and if you have any questions, please put them on the doc. And if you want to reach out to me to set up a Google Meet, if there's anything you want to talk about from a different section or this section, please do so. All right, guys, have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.